Chapter 12. Bravest Heart. Rowan was crawling with his eyes shut tight. He had found that this was better than facing the sighing blackness ahead. His hands were bleeding, grazed and cut by the rock. His legs ached with weariness. He could hear Strong John pulling himself along behind, groaning with effort as he struggled against the walls that pressed against his broad shoulders. They had stopped speaking long ago. The passage had circled and turned back on itself many times. They crawled and rested in a nightmarish pattern that repeated itself over and over again. Twice they had fallen asleep and woken in the darkness, crying out to each other in panic. Now they did not know how long they had been in the tunnel. They did not know whether it was day or night. All they knew was that they were climbing, upward, always upward. 7 hearts the journey make, 7 ways the heart will break. Sheba's words spun round in Rowan's exhausted brain. The mountain had struck 5 times. In 5 different ways, 5 brave hearts had been forced to retreat in shame from their quest. Ellis, Brondon, Val, Alan, Marley, all gone. Now only he and John remained, the last 2 hearts for the mountain to break. The tunnel narrowed, and he reached yet another turning. With despair, he heard the scraping of Strong John's boots and clothes against rock, the struggling gasps as John heaved himself forward, then lay still. John's every move was hampered by the tunnel walls that gripped him. In all this time he had not been able to reach his flask or Rowan's to drink. He was nearing exhaustion. And so was Rowan. If they should come upon a blockage, a fallen rock, anything, they were doomed. Rowan knew that he would not have the strength to move it, and John was tightly wedged behind him. Panic rose in him as it had so many times since this terrible journey began. He screwed up his eyes more tightly and breathed deeply. He had discovered that this helped. Star, too, helped. Rowan crawled on around the bend, thinking of Star, the most peaceful and loving thing he knew. He imagined himself walking beside her to the bookshop pool in the evening, his hand on her mane, the cool breeze blowing in his face. The fear died in him. The picture in his mind grew stronger. Now he could almost see the bookshop pool and Star bending her head to drink. He could almost smell the trodden grass, the blossom from the orchard. He could almost feel the cool breeze on his face. He smiled in the darkness. It was extraordinary. He really could feel that breeze, just as if... Rowan's eyes flew open. He stared, licked his lips, and shouted as the cool breeze, the cold breeze, the icy cold breeze flew full in his face. "John!" he screamed, "Come on! We are there! We are there!" He pulled himself along, faster and faster, careless of his bleeding hands and aching legs, toward the source of that icy wind and the glimmer of white that beckoned him. And behind him, with a last desperate effort, crawled John. Agonizing minutes later, they were lying together on the floor of a shallow cave that opened to the air. It was freezing. Outside there was howling wind and whiteness of moonlit snow. "Water," croaked Strong John through cracked lips. Holding the flask to John's mouth, Rowan looked down at him in fright. John's clothing had been torn away by the rock in many places, and the skin beneath was grazed and bleeding. His face was gray. His eyes were closed. The water bubbled from his mouth and dripped to the ground. He shivered without stopping. Some sticks and dried leaves were heaped in the corner of the cave, blown in by the wind. Rowan gathered them together, found John's tinderbox, and managed to light a fire. It smoked and sputtered, but at least it gave out a little warmth. Strong John lay still. Rowan waited, his hands clasped anxiously. After a time, a little color began to creep back into the man's face. He stirred and opened his eyes. "We are above the cloud, Rowan," he muttered. "I believe that we have been underground for a night and a day, and part of yet another night. By this time, if they are safe, Alan and Marley will be back in Rin, and we are nearly at our journey's end. The map!" Rowan unrolled the map. He followed with his fingers the icy path they had taken, traced the way above the cloud. "We are almost at the top of the mountain," he said slowly, "and close to us, very close. There must be another cave, or something like it, very large, very deep. The red line ends there." He swallowed. His eyes had moved to the second last blank space. "And the verse." John's voice was very weak. "Read the verse." Rowan read it aloud, the map shaking in his trembling hands. "Fire, water, earth, and air, All meet in the dragon's lair. 6 brave hearts have failed the test. 1 continues in the quest. Remember well the words you know, when on to find your fate you go." "So," said John, and closed his eyes again. "Bravest heart will carry on." "But, John, the verse does not speak truly," cried Rowan. "There are 2 of us, 2. John moistened his lips with his tongue. "No, Rowan, I am finished. You must leave me here, and at dawn go on alone, as Sheba foretold." He turned his head away. "When sleep is death and hope is gone." The fire gave a final flicker and went out. Sleep is death. "John!" Rowan screamed in terror. He shook John's shoulders savagely so that the big man stirred and groaned. "John, do not go to sleep. It is too cold. You are too weak. You will freeze. You will die. John, get up." John did not move. Rowan sobbed, beating at the ground. "John, I cannot go on alone. You know I cannot. Sheba did not foretell this. Sheba said the bravest heart would carry on. That is what she said. I am not the bravest heart. I fear everything, everything." John's pale lips curved. "Yes, Skinny Rabbit, so you do," he murmured. "Fearing, you climbed the mountain. Fearing, you faced its dangers. And fearing, you went on. That is real bravery, Rowan. Only fools do not fear. Sheba knew that. Sheba knew everything all along." Rowan stared, and slowly an icy calm settled on him. He knew what he must do. "Sleep now," he whispered. "I will look after you." Rowan crept to the entrance of the cave. He took off his jacket and wrapped it around his hands. Then he plunged them into the snow and began to build a wall of snow up around the entrance, filling the gaping space till only a small hole was left for the wind to penetrate. It took a long time, and despite the jacket his hands were throbbing with cold when he at last was satisfied. Strong John lay curled up by the ashes of the fire. It was already warmer in the cave, but still not warm enough for safety. Rowan pulled on his jacket. Staggering now with weariness, he collected some stones and put them in the ashes, then laid over them the 2 torches he and John had carried through the mountain. He lit the torches and watched them flare up, then settle down to burn slowly. He lay down beside John, cuddling close and warming him with his body. The torches would heat the air. They would heat the stones. The stones would hold the heat after the fire had died. And hope is gone. No, the verse had reckoned without him. He still had heart and hope. Now, with luck, the dawn would find them both him and John alive. Then they would see. Rowan closed his eyes at last and slept. His sleep was deep and dreamless, and when he woke, he thought at first that no time had passed. But then he saw the pale light that streamed into the cave through the hole in the snow wall and became aware of the silence. It was dawn, and the wind had stopped. Rowan sat up and with a beating heart peered at John. He was warm and breathing. Gently Rowan shook his shoulder. "John," he whispered, "John, wake up. It is morning, and we must go. Together." They pushed their way through the snow, Strong John leaning on Rowan's shoulder. Their boots sank into the soft whiteness as they walked, squeaking and crunching into holes that shone icy blue. The tracks of animals that hunted for food in the night crisscrossed their path, but the animals themselves were not to be seen. Once Rowan thought he saw a sharp nose twitch in a burrow, but in the blink of an eye, whatever it was had disappeared. Thick cloud floated around them. Above them it cleared to a light haze, and through it they could see the sky. It was a clear, pale pink. A fine day in Rin, thought Rowan, glancing behind him, though he knew he would see nothing. Rin was somewhere there below, but the cloud hid it from view. He felt John's compass in his pocket, the map in his belt. "With these I will find the way back," he promised himself, "however long it takes. I will bring Strong John back to Rin. I will see Mother again, and Star, and the Bookshaw Pool in the dawn. I will." He faced ahead and squinted into the cloud, trying to see. John was struggling beside him, his breath coming hard and fast. Now he was leaning more heavily on Rowan's shoulder, but still he moved on without complaint. Rowan was filled with pity for his suffering and wonder at his courage. "All well, John?" he asked cheerfully as he could. "Nearly there now," and he was struck by a sudden memory, an echo of Strong John's voice saying those very words to him in just the same way on the first morning as they walked away from Rin. Rowan caught his breath. Had John's heart been aching for him as his ached for John now, and for the same reasons? Had he then been wrong, quite wrong, about John all along? "Rowan!" John clutched his shoulder. "I think I see something." A shape rose within the cloud behind a natural wall of snow-covered rock. It was white on the edges and pale, shining blue in the middle. It was huge, high, and wide. Above it there was only sky. "We are at the top," breathed Rowan. His heart began to race, but slowly they moved closer, and as they did so, they understood. The whole tip of the mountain was hollow, making a vast cavern of rock, snow, and ice. The cavern's walls soared to the heavens, flashing in the rising sun like white fire. Fire, water, earth, and air. A thick carpet of powdery snow covered the ground from its entrance to the wall of rock where they stood. Rowan stared. There was no sound, no tracks that marked the flat carpet of snow. Nothing at all had crossed this place for a day at least, perhaps many days. He helped John over the rocks, and they walked to the cavern entrance and cautiously peered inside. White. Nothing but blinding white and shadowy blue. Huge icicles fringed the entrance and the roof. Weird ice shapes covered the walls, rose from the floor, and everywhere there was snow. Their eyes were dazzled. They moved forward, blinking, climbing over the ridges and drifts that covered the floor in gazing wonder. Rowan turned to John to speak, saw his face change, the look of horror. And then the ground erupted beneath their feet. Snow scattered, and a mighty tail lashed, hurling Rowan onto his back, throwing strong John crashing to the wall. And Rowan, screaming, watched as the back of the cave came to life, opened its blood-red eyes, and lunged for him, shaking snow and ice from its shining white scales, baring its dripping teeth. Huge, ancient, terrible, the dragon of the mountain.